In previous video, you saw how we drove through Namibia with our pickup truck fitted with a roof tent. We saw fantastic nature and wildlife, and now that story continues. Now in this video, we start in the northern part of Botswana along the Chobe river. We spend a few days exploring the area, and then we make a quick pit stop into Zimbabwe to see the Victoria Falls. Then we start heading south through Botswana, ending up in South Africa once again. As we drove from the border to Kasana during the evening, we saw everything during the sunset. But the next day we were up bright and early, because we had a sunrise game drive. It was freezing cold sitting in these open-top jeeps, but as soon as the sun came out, we started to feel the warmth. Immediately we were greeted by tons of lions who were also just starting the day and getting ready to go out to hunt. We had a quick pit stop to get some morning coffee. Fortunately, we were super lucky to see a leopard up in a tree. This was the final animal to complete the big five. Heading back towards Kasane, we came across a skull from an elephant, and our driver jumped out to try and gather the bones from the skull, including the jaw, and we could see how massive it was. Shortly after, we encountered a big group of elephants that were blocking the road. And one of them was waving the ears towards us, sort of indicating that we were definitely not allowed to pass. So we had to sit it out and wait for the whole family, including the baby elephant, to cross the road. Also, the guide told us that normally you can see if an elephant is stressed, if it's wet below the ears. So if you can see like a watermark below the ears, then you can tell that the elephant is super stressed, and you should definitely not try to provoke it. Around noon, we were back into Kasane, and we had a few hours of break before our next activity. In the afternoon, we had another boat ride booked, and this time we were going up and down of the Chobe River. You could easily see why people would spend several days doing cruises up and down this river, because immediately we were greeted by wildlife. We saw hippos, elephants, and alligators. We even saw some elephants crossing the river, and then when they got to the other bank, they had to dry themselves by blowing sand onto themselves. Bright and early the next day, we left our car and got picked up instead. This time we were heading towards the Zimbabwe border. To get a visa into Zimbabwe, you still need to pay. I think we paid around $30 for a single entry visa. That's not too bad. From the border, we had 30 to 40 kilometers of driving towards Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls is of course both the waterfall, but also the town situated on the Zimbabwe side of the falls. First, we decided to go out onto the old railway bridge. It's basically a neutral zone between Zimbabwe and Zambia, so we actually have to exit Zimbabwe to get out onto it. From here you have a great view of the falls, but you can also do bungee jumping. And of course the midpoint of the bridge would be the geographic border between the two countries. After that, we decided to explore the trails overlooking the falls. Now, the Zimbabwean side actually has a lot more facings towards the fall. I think it's roughly 70% they have and 30% to Zambia. So there's many great vistas. Because it was the end of the rainy season, the water was flowing super heavily. And because of that, there was an immense amount of upwards mist, basically causing it to feel like rain when you were walking along the pathways. Some places it was very wet and we had to deploy both our rain jackets but also our umbrellas. In the evening, due to a cancellation in our plans, I went down to the falls again, but with my drone, just to get some shots from above. But early in the next morning, we had something super exciting waiting. Because what had been cancelled the evening before, luckily we'd been able to book for sunrise, and this was a helicopter ride. So we got the first available time slot, and we set off just before sunrise. and as we came over Victoria Falls, the sun started to rise. We did several loops, both over the Zambian and Zimbabwean side, to get as many views as possible. And it was honestly a great experience to capture the entire scale of the waterfall. High on that experience, we had to go back towards the Botswana border and pick up our car. Because now we had quite a long drive of several hundred kilometers down south through Botswana. We arrived in the evening when it was dark, so we couldn't really see much of the campsite. So we cooked some steaks and jumped to bed. It was definitely the most freezing night that we had ever had in the tent, because I think we were down to 4 degrees during the night. Again in the morning as the sun rose, we started to feel the warmth, which was very much needed. It was quite a remote campsite, just along the main road, but far away from any big cities. So it was a brilliant place to take some astro photography during the night. Now we had to drive further down south in Botswana and have our last camping spot on this trip. Along the way, we stopped at a supermarket and bought some freshly cut meat. It was super cheap and it also looked amazing. So we thought we had made a steal. The campsite for this day was a rhino reserve, effectively also a big game reserve. Here they would be taking care of rhinos, so if they had been poached or hurt out in the wild, they would take them into this reserve and take care of them. What was additionally interesting was that each of the campsites in the reserve was not fenced, meaning that the rhinos, zebras and impalas, I think those were the main animals in the game reserve, in theory could walk into our camp at any moment. Before setting camp though, we decided to drive out into the reserve. Maybe just to see what visitors we would be expecting later that evening. In the evening we decided to grill the meat that we had bought earlier in the day in the supermarket. And we were super excited. However, the steaks that we had bought were super chewy. The ribs that we also had, they were quite good, but there was just not a whole lot of meat onto them. As dark fell and we were walking around with our headlamps, we could see the reflection on ice into the woods. So we crossed our fingers and hoped that our grill and the fire that we had made would keep animals away. And suddenly going to the bathroom during the middle of the night didn't seem that attractive. Also at the campsite, I did a full tour of the car, where you can see the different utilities and features. I've turned that into a raw and relatively uncut video, so I will leave a link up here somewhere, and then you can go see that if you want. But now, back to the campsite.
Okay, jeg kan se nogle store øjne derinde, men den går ikke som et næsehorn, den går mere som en impala. Kan du se øjnene? Den går meget som en impala. Nå, stikker den af. Det er en meget interessant campingplads det her, må man sige. Men madlavningen er i gang. Bilen står her, og der er bål i gang herover, så vi kan grille vores steaks. Og jeg tænker, at vores stemmer og ild, det må holde dyrene væk.
Jeg skal ikke drikke noget efter kl. 8, for man ved sgu ikke, om der kommer en næsehorn. I don't want that.
Der er ikke langt til toilettet herfra, men der er 50 meget sorte meter.
The next day, the plan was to drive back into South Africa. It was also a day of several hundred kilometers of driving, and we were going down to the Waterberg Mountains in the northern part of South Africa. We arrived at the Matingwe Lodge and Game Reserve in the afternoon. And here on the path up towards the lodge, we were greeted by oryxes, impalas and zebras as well. Immediately in the afternoon, we headed out on our first South African game drive. The scenery in the Waterberg Mountains were stunning, and of course, they also had tons of wildlife, just as we entered the national park. Because it was a low season, for the first night we were the only guests in the lodge. So it was a private tour that we actually went on. And our driver had brought tons of snacks for us to enjoy on the back of the car once we made a small picnic out in the wild. We came back to the lodge after sunset and we were feeling super cold, but luckily our host had prepared some hot chocolate with amarulo in it, which basically is South African Bailey. Super tasty. In the following morning, we went out on the trip's last morning game drive. had morning coffee among the rhinos, Pumbaa, and birds that doesn't really seem to have any wings, so they just run as soon as a car is coming. It was quite amusing. During midday, we had some time to chill. Cecil went out for a run, and I had time to send up the drone. Later that afternoon, we went out for our final game drive of the trip. And this turned out to be special. The reason for that was we took a new route, and here we encountered probably the largest group of elephants that we had seen on the entire trip. It was a bit terrifying though, because one by one they started to appear on a ridge above us. And suddenly, step by step, they decided to walk closer to us. So our driver, he decided to put it in reverse and slowly started to go backwards. And despite us doing that, the elephants still decided to walk towards us. Some of them were waving the ears to indicate that we shouldn't be there, and also we didn't really feel welcome. Luckily, the elephant stopped at some point, we could turn over the car, and then we headed back. We found a small picnic place where we could enjoy some wine, look at some monkeys, and then we headed back to the lodge. On the next day, it was time to go home. We had a flight in the afternoon, so we still had a quiet morning where we could enjoy the rest of the lodge, which was super aesthetic and just how you would imagine a lodge in South Africa, I guess. We set off towards Johannesburg, bought a bit of cake on the way. And then we handed back the car. The rental company took us to the airport, and from there, it was time to fly home.